Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. This is the first episode in a series of 3 with our friends at RotaGeek. And joining me for all 3 episodes, I'm delighted to introduce David Payne, who's the Chief Product Officer. Hi, David. How are you?
Hey, Simon. Good, thanks. And thanks for having me.
No, welcome. Looking forward to this mini-series that we're recording with you. We're going to kind of cover all things WFM, and we're going to kick off today's session talking around automating employee scheduling. But before we get into the detail and kind of share our thoughts and feelings on that, just give us a bit of background first on yourself. What have you done in your career? How did you get to RotaGeek, and what do you do in RotaGeek?
Yeah, sure. So, I've been at RotaGeek about 5 years now. As you say, kind of running the product side, so planning our roadmap and how we're going to evolve our product for our customers' needs. But joined to build the customer success function when RotaGeek was first starting to become a kind of, enterprise-facing company and starting to build business cases for and onboard and help the change management for larger sort of high street retailer kind of enterprises trying to use our software. And we'll get into why that's needed and everything in a minute. But before that, I guess I'd never been in tech or in SaaS or startups or anything like that before. I started as a McKinsey consultant and then spent a few years in the city as a sort of stock market analyst of various kinds, but always focused on the retail sector. So I guess what sort of drew me across into the world of tech and to RotaGeek specifically was tools that can help retailers and make them more efficient.
And for those that maybe aren't familiar with RotaGeek, do you want to give us a quick kind of company biog as well in terms of how it was formed and the kind of stuff that you do there?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's a cloud-based scheduling solution. I guess we mostly face retail now, but actually the origins of the company a few years before I joined it, our founder Chris McCulloch was an A&E doctor who was trying to improve scheduling in the NHS, and in the process of building that, I guess found that he'd built a tool that was useful to lots and lots of organizations that have shift workers and are leaking efficiency through shift scheduling. And so, yes, for the last few years, RotaGeek has been facing mostly into the retail industry, although we do still face health and any business that sort of has some of the same sorts of challenges with the way they try and put their people in the right place at the right time. But yeah, cloud-based solution, including auto scheduling, which I guess is going to be quite a lot of what we talk about in this series. But actually, I guess functionally, we cover everything to do with that shift worker management. So mobile app for requesting leave and payroll integration so people get paid correctly at the end of the period, and reporting and all those sorts of things. So RotaGeek kind of covers, yes, I guess our real focus and specialty is in optimized, automated scheduling, data-driven scheduling, but that's supported by a mobile and cloud platform that covers all of the sort of workforce management requirements.
Every time I see Chris, your founder, I always kind of pose the question, did you work more hours when you're an A&E doctor, or do you work more hours since you've been starting and driving a tech company forward? And I think maybe it's the latter. But no,
sure it is.
Interesting backstory. And Chris has been on an earlier podcast in our WFM series, if anybody wants to check out that track. But yeah, let's dive into the detail then, David. So we're going to talk about retail specifically, I think, because that's where my heart is and clearly where a lot of your time's been spent, and this debate around automating employee scheduling. So if I cast my mind back 20 years when I worked at Focus DIY, who sadly aren't longer around, we implemented automated scheduling, and probably forever since there's been this view that you should be able to put a load of data in a solution, people data, sales data, till data, whatever it might be, press a button, and hey presto, you get this answer which is 100% correct. You put it on a wall, nobody changes anything, everybody goes and works it, and then you do all the stuff through time and attendance to
Sounds
validate.
so easy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like, well, there's the golden bullet, I'll have 10. It's never, in my mind, transpired that way. So when we talk about should retailers be automating employee scheduling, what does that mean in your mind, especially that automating piece? Is it fully automated? Is there still manager input? Where does it go in your mind in the kind of RotaGeek journey?
Yeah, I think yes. I mean, I think that is right, and maybe we should sort of answer. We should answer why should they be automating employee scheduling, but let's also talk about why not. How do I, are there some businesses for whom it's not appropriate, and maybe we should also, before we get too deep into it, pin down that distinction we're making, I suppose. And I was trying to set up a bit in terms of the functional coverage of the RotaGeek tool. Automated scheduling. I guess we're referring primarily to, I'm about to make a new week's rota. I've got sort of an empty week in the future. I've got data about it potentially, and I want to just build the rota. But then there's all the other interactions and maintenance of a rota that go around that. Like, as you say, things change. The team changes. People swap. Your view of the demand of the store might change between now and then. So I guess focusing particularly on the automating bit, because I think some of the benefits of sort of going sort of mobile and digital are lower hanging fruit and more obvious, and I think more sort of no regrets for most companies. But automating, yeah, I agree, is sort of tricky. I guess the obvious benefit to it is it's an opportunity to be more efficient. We'll dig into this a bit more, I think, later on. But when we always attempt to quantify, obviously, kind of what the benefit is of a particular business moving to a solution like ours, and we look in the first place at what current rotas are doing in terms of we take examples of rotas that real managers are making week in, week out for their stores, and we look at that against actual or a good model of demand, i.e., would your ideal kind of staffing levels be 15 minutes by 15 minutes, doing what task potentially, assuming you've got a good model of what ideal looks like, how far off are these human rotas? And they can be quite far off. We sort of routinely see sort of 30 or 40% of kind of the hours in the wrong places in those rotas. And I guess that manifests in the stores not having enough people at those peak times or on peak tasks at peak times, and people twiddling thumbs at quieter times. And only so many of the tasks in the store can be moved around to kind of to be done when the people are in. There's an awful lot of customer reactive demand where you really need the staff to be in when they're needed, when the customers are walking into the store and needing service and assistance and restocking and tills and everything else. So that's where you sort of see the problem. And yes, the opportunity is to eliminate some of that human inefficiency, making a rota, doing the sort of jigsaw of fitting together shifts through the week for all of your different team members, doing what they're good at, and making that kind of, as you build that jigsaw, making that sort of shape fit to when you need the most people is quite hard, and humans are just not very good at it. It's something that I think we've found, and the world is finding that this is exactly the sort of the problem that computers are really good at. So why not harness that? So that's the sort of the obvious opportunity. It's an opportunity to be more efficient, reduce that leakage, and ultimately be able to have more staff in your store serving customers when you have the most tasks to do and the most customers in the store, and pay for that by not having so many people twiddling thumbs at quieter times. And I guess the why not, as a retailer, can I tell if maybe this is not the right step for me? I'm not ready for this, or it won't be worth as much to me as the next guy. We sort of think the shape of your demand, I guess, if you have quite volatile demand through the day, i.e. quiet times are quite different from busy times, and if you have quite a flexible team, i.e. there's quite a lot of ways you could build that rota rather than lots and lots of kind of contracted, committed shifts that are fixed from week to week and never going to change. If I have that kind of behavior in my stores, then and the limiting factor to how efficient I can be is how good my individual managers are at kind of doing the timetable, then probably there's a big opportunity. But if I have fixed patterns that I, for whatever reason, contractually through unions or whatever, I'm not going to easily be able to change, then obviously my upside is more limited. And if I have very flat, or I control my demand, so I guess we often talk, one of the reasons our tool is good for retail is because, customers walk into stores and they come when they want to, and they come in whatever numbers they come in. If I'm doing something like, there are shift workers on, manufacturing lines as well, but that's not the same kind of thing from a demand perspective. You don't have to try and match your staff to some external demand requirement. You get the work done when you have the people in. So again, sort of there's not to say sort of better shift scheduling is not useful at all, kind of in a factory or on a manufacturing line, but the upside from efficiency won't be as great in those kinds of places as it is, in a typical store environment.
So the jigsaw's more complex, isn't it, in retail, or there's more pieces, so it's 1,000-piece jigsaw rather than a 4-piece jigsaw.
Yeah, exactly.
Sense. And having run retail stores myself, I kind of knew that Tuesdays, Saturdays, Sundays would be my busiest. Tuesdays was OAP days, a 10% discount. Saturday, Sundays, clearly more people off work doing DIY, therefore coming into the shop to buy. Other than that, I probably would have had a view of the rest of the week in terms of priority order. Data, when it's produced, whether that be till data, footfall data, a mixture of two, in that pattern, but clearly down to a much more granular level, so 15 minutes, half an hour, hourly. To be able to plan against more accurate data must be an immediate step forward for lots of retailers.
Well, yes, we think, I guess there's sort of two things maybe in what you said. And I think, yes, you're right. One of them is just the extra granularity. And, we definitely see that. And we, to some extent, kind of quantified, if you don't change anything else, but you're now able to start your shifts on something other than on the round hour, or you have some view of demand, which is down to that granularity to inform it, then there's a few percentage points of efficiency just in that. But there's also this idea that, that sort of that weekly model, that weekly pattern that you're referring to, like the template, both of demand, i.e. knowing, what kinds of demographics you're going to have, what sorts of levels of busyness at what time-ish of day you are busy on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, is really useful, but each Monday is going to be a little bit more different than that because, of course, day of the week is one of the most important factors in the shape of the day in terms of trading. But, a given Monday is going to be a certain distance from Christmas, a certain distance from payday, a certain likely seasonal kind of weather environment and all these sorts of things. So every Monday is different and that weekly pattern isn't going to be perfect. And similarly with your staff shifts, you may, if you've got a very static team and nobody ever joins, nobody ever leaves, and you can tell people when to take their holiday, then I guess you can just make that rota once for the week and sort of cookie cutter it onto every week of the year. But of course, nobody's team is like that. You have constant churn, I guess, of team, people joining, people leaving, unplanned absence, planned absence that's different from week to week, preferences that people have that you may or may not be able to honor, but it'd be nice to be able to, and that sort of thing. So the team changes all the time, the demand changes all the time. In the weekly template, we sort of think, of course, there's a reason people do it. It's a reasonable proxy, but there definitely is a few percentage points of efficiency to be gained by going to the next level.
Yeah, and I like the other thing that maybe people might not be aware of. When you solutionize scheduling, it gives you a framework, so it gives you a standard way of doing it, and you wouldn't believe the amount of times we still see across all types of industries, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint documents, Word documents pinned to the wall. It'll look like pretty with all pictures on in one store, it'll just be black and white in another store it'll have marker pen all over it. So for me, there's a big step change. Forget the kind of data at this point and how you create the schedule, but just having everything in one place with some central visibility, some standard practices and routines and ways of doing things. Sometimes that gets forgotten because we kind of focus on this, so how you're producing the plan, what's the detail, but this having this framework to work in, for me, again, is a seismic step forward.
Yeah, and I think I guess we said we were going to talk a bit about why retailers, why some people are moving towards scheduling automation. We're sort of making the case for why it's good. There definitely is also a trend of people starting to do it, and I think one of the things worth pointing out in terms of why it's happening now is that those kinds of some available technologies now are enabling that. So I guess what you're referring to there, I guess, is yes, the sort of the on-demand access to the latest version of the schedule, not having version control issues, I guess, around that. If you've got a template that you're going to pin up or a version of the rota that you're going to, stick up on paper in the staff room, but it's going to be quite hard for people to keep up to date with each week being different from the last or last minute changes or anything like that. So the fact that there is now the infrastructure for people to have mobile apps, including mobile apps for work, in their pocket for pretty much every store team member. And we can use cloud and we can use mobile to keep people up to date with the latest versions of these things really easily. And lots of other things too. We can, involve them in lots of self-service and transparent transactions, swapping their shifts and all that kind of stuff. But just the fact that you don't have a version control problem now, I think massively enables this. So obviously there are some enablers in the technology that companies like ours are building in the data science, so the ability to do better optimized rotas than maybe some of the kind of past iterations of this in other eras of technology. But then that is definitely, and that's the automated scheduling component, but that's massively enabled by feeling confident that as you make all these minute changes and people's rotas are going to be slightly different from one week to the next, that isn't onerous for them to kind of keep up with and still turn up for work on time because of those sorts of other features.
One of the things you mentioned there, which is interesting, is this whole data science piece. So is it fair to say that kind of retailers are starting to move towards this more automated world because we now rely and trust data a lot more, and there's much more data available?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think kind of trying to unpick all the different elements here. Certainly, we find that the technology of sort of genetic algorithms and different alternatives, even open source alternatives, so that we're specialists in scheduling, but we're not necessarily wanting to be deep specialists in every aspect of that value chain, from kind of raw forecasting and optimization through to how you think about that in terms of shifts and shift patterns. But there's much more of a value chain, I guess, around these kind of components now. It's a much more mature, I guess, economy of AI and algorithms that companies like ours can kind of. Obviously, there's a lot of proprietary things in what we do in our algorithms, but there's much more of an ecosystem around this now. So that has made it easier to provide the solutions. And I think you're right, there's more trust from companies who are using that kind of big data in more settings, maybe around their POS and e-com, certainly around supply chain. I guess that's one of the other big trends around here. I wonder if one of the reasons we're seeing more people getting more excited about digital and automated scheduling now is it's a kind of next up problem after an awful lot of technology has been deployed in sort of inventory and supply chain and in e-commerce and warehousing. And now this kind of knowing what your employees are really kind of doing hour by hour and being able to, model scenarios and plan that better is something that companies are sort of getting around to now. And it's definitely enabled by the way that technology has grown up to support it.
Clearly, we've had COVID around. It's been a tricky 18 months for every individual, let alone every company that exists pretty much across the world. It looks like it's one of those things that we're learning to live with. It's here to stay. So how automation and those that are kind of moving to this more automated approach, what things do you think that will give them? What foundations will that lay to help them cope with some of the things that living with a virus brings? So, examples being higher absenteeism, more frequent spells of days off, unpredictable demand in some cases based on local lockdowns and things.
Yes. No, I mean, I think that is right. And I think obviously in some ways that sort of discontinuity it can be a challenge for some of the data-driven things that we want to do, as well as in, if a store's been closed for a long time, or the pattern of trade around it has dramatically changed because people's commutes are now different or shopping habits are now different, all these sorts of things. That obviously is a sort of headwind for that whole forecasting process. Having more consistent historic data to work from enables us to extrapolate patterns better. But obviously it's even more of a challenge for those kind of fixed cookie cutters that people were used to using before. So lots and lots of companies, kind of all they had was that local knowledge and instinct of the manager who's run the store for 5 years, and the rota patterns that they've always used that have always worked. And of course now those don't work at all, and you've sort of got to reinvent. And using some technology to kind of to fast track that and power it, I think is a really sensible thing for companies to be looking at. And certainly we find with our kind of forecasting process, it doesn't need, the most important part of the process is to look at that kind of intraday trading pattern. So, like you said, kind of like when in the day do you get busy doing what exactly on the typical Monday? And you've got seasonality and other features to lay on top of that. But the sort of the shape of a Monday is a really key one. And our kind of forecasting engine doesn't need very much recent history to start doing quite a good job of forecasting that. And again, it's the kind of job that computers and algorithms are really good at, and humans take a little bit, it's a bit trickier. So that's a real opportunity just from that sort of that break or that discontinuity in when, stores opening hours, stores patterns of trade, stores absolute level of busyness, to be able to sort of, you've got to reinvent that, you've got to remodel it, and to do it with a technology kind of tailwind rather than have to do it all on, see if managers have spotted the trends and have adapted to them yet is definitely powerful. I guess lots of things have changed through COVID. I mean, in terms of not just the customer profile, who's walking in and when, but lots of things inside the store, the new roles that have been needed to help manage that, flows around a store, and with sort of lockdowns and having to close and reopen and that kind of thing, the additional communication you have to do, the additional things you have to do to retain skills in your team and train them and that sort of thing. And these are all things that they're all changes in what you need from your staffing model. And I guess that's tools like ours can really help with that. But I guess this is sort of something that you guys at Rethink are looking at a lot as well.
Yeah, we're seeing lots of change within how people are recruiting again. So again, people back to thinking about that full-time, part-time mix, and then what's the minimum contract hours I offer somebody? What's the maximum potentially? How do I flex people up and down? So if we've got people who are having to self-isolate, is it better to have a bigger pool of heads to pull from or not? Or does that just mean that there's potentially more people that might be self-isolating? So it's a real conundrum still, I think, for retailers, but again, has really pushed them. And we've talked about it in a couple of points in this conversation in that whole digital aspect. So have they got apps that can communicate to the colleagues, shift swap, shift bid, all those kind of generic features that exist? Are they in place and do they work? Because I think one of the biggest challenges really at the start of the pandemic, regardless of solution, was lots of big organizations really struggled to communicate directly with deskless workers. So people that didn't have a PC or a company phone, they just couldn't get in touch with them other than, old-fashioned mail or potentially they had an email. So I think that was foundational stuff. And now, again, we're back to looking at, where time's spent, how time's spent, back to some of that demand stuff. So what additional cleaning's gone in and how long does it stay for? How long does it cost? But it's all work and all should form part of the scheduling process.
Totally. And I think it's probably worth facing into the fact that I guess lots of what's happened with COVID sort of continues to happen. And, some of these permanent changes probably we're going to live with now have just, quite apart from the specifics of how they change life inside the store, they're just putting more pressure on the store, right? So there is it's accelerated the shift to online. It's encouraged people to want to spend less time in stores where they might be exposed to other people, and just generally has taken volume out of most stores. So that's obviously increased the pressure on lots of companies who operate them. And it seems quite right that quite apart from sort of wanting to do the best that they can for the new normal, they have to look for efficiencies to be able to sort of keep running those stores profitably at all.
Yeah, it's not sustainable to keep layering cost in. Clearly, they're all under different challenges, and we digress slightly with Brexit, with taxes, with importing goods from abroad. So there's a whole bunch of different economic pressures that are coming down, and clearly one of the big ones that you can control is how much you spend on salary, and that comes with choices around service and standards and quality in store. But nevertheless, everyone's looking in that field again in terms of where are my opportunities to either increase time with customers, therefore sales, or reduce the non-value add and the idle time. So we'll pause there, David. I think that's a good place to end episode 1. We're going to come back in episode 2 and get into more of the detail around the benefits of the automation piece, what things we're seeing that drive, and I suppose answer the question of, can you ever fully automate? So can we get to that point of pressing the button, computer spits out an answer and everybody works it? But we'll hold that thought until episode 2. So thanks for your time on episode 1, and we'll catch up soon.
I'll see you then.